Cold sweat always smells the same, regardless of the passport tucked into your inner pocket. It smells of ammonia, stale fear, and inevitability. On that bleak Wednesday, the 14th of April, 1982, in Gdansk, the air inside the station canteen was thick with the scent of burnt onions, wet wool, and the cheap chlorine used to scrub the sticky floors. A man in a gray jacket sat at a corner table, trying to dissolve into the background of the scuffed walls. His name was Jan Kaczmarek, at least according to the identity card issued in Warsaw. He had perfect manners, a flawless Polish accent with a hint of a Masovian lilt, and a face that one forgets 3 seconds after looking away. He was a masterpiece of illegal intelligence, the product of 10 years of training in closed centers near Moscow, where every gesture, every tilt of the head, and every intonation was seared into his consciousness until it became an unconditional reflex. But at the exact second his fingers gripped that cheap aluminum fork, his fate was already sealed. He did not yet know that his life had ended the moment the tines touched the soft, mashed potatoes. 3 tables away sat an old man. He wore a worn-out tunic without insignia, but he possessed a characteristic posture that even the slouch of retirement could not hide. A former state security officer, a man whose eyes were trained to look for inconsistencies in the geometry of reality. He was lazily chewing his meal until his gaze snagged on Jan's hands. 1 second, 2, 5. Time slowed down, turning into viscous resin. The old man stopped chewing. He saw something he should not have seen in a Polish working-class canteen during martial law. He saw an outsider. To understand how Jan ended up at this point of no return, one must go back 5 years to the quiet corridors of the training center, where time was measured not in hours, but in the number of memorized legends. Jan, whose real name had long been erased from the archives, was the best. They taught him everything: how to assemble a radio transmitter in the dark, how to read tracks on a dusty road, how to kill with a single movement of the thumb. His brain was a library of data, his body a perfectly tuned instrument. Instructors tested him under conditions of extreme stress. They woke him in the middle of the night with gunfire and forced him to recount the biography of a fictional aunt from Krakow. They made him drink vodka with provocateurs to see if his tongue would loosen. He passed every test. His psychological profile was a monolith. But there was one thing the handlers considered too insignificant to devote thousands of hours of training to: the cultural code of motor skills. The tiny, barely perceptible habits that are laid down in us at the age of 4 when a mother teaches us how to hold a spoon. We do not think about how we eat. It happens at the level of spinal reflexes. For a person raised in the Western tradition or trained according to strict international standards of etiquette, the knife and fork are an inseparable tandem. Knife in the right hand, fork in the left. Always. Even if there is soft food on the plate that could be broken with the edge of the fork. It is an automatism of a civilization accustomed to a certain order at the table. In the People's Republic of Poland in the 80s, in the workers' canteens of Gdansk, the social code was different. Here, food was fuel, not a ritual. Locals used a knife only to cut a piece of tough meat. As soon as the meat was cut, the knife was set aside. The fork was transferred to the right hand, and the rest of the meal, potatoes, cabbage, soft cutlets, was consumed with the fork alone. This was a natural folk ergonomics. A man who held a knife and fork until the very last bit of puree looked as strange here as if he had walked into a factory wearing a tuxedo. Jan Kaczmarek made exactly that mistake. His left hand, clad in the sleeve of a cheap jacket made of coarse fabric, firmly gripped the bent aluminum fork. His right hand confidently held the knife. He carefully, almost mechanically, cut small pieces from a soft-boiled sausage, even though there was no technical necessity for it. He did it the way he was taught in the elite school where they taught upper-class manners, so that he could pass for a local in Brussels or London. But he was not in Brussels. He was in Gdansk, amid the smell of diesel fuel and the roar of shipyard cranes. The old man at the neighboring table narrowed his eyes. In his head, the gears of an old but still functional mechanism began to click. He saw Jan neatly bringing the fork to his mouth with his left hand while keeping the knife in his right. It was too correct, too Western a motor skill. To an ordinary passerby, it would be a mere quirk, but to a man who had hunted spies for decades, it was a red alert, as loud as a shipyard siren. The old man rose slowly, clutching his aching lower back. He did not head for the exit. He walked toward the payphone in the corner of the hall. Did Jan hear a ringing in his ears at that moment? Did he feel the invisible noose tightening around his neck? He continued to eat, looking out the window at the gray clouds drifting over the Baltic. His mind was occupied with the schedule for data transmission via a courier in Gdynia. He was mentally scrolling through numbers, frequencies, and codes. He was focused on the global mission, on protecting the interests of the Empire, on the great game of shadows. And it was precisely this focus on the grand that blinded him to the small. The counterintelligence system worked with frightening efficiency. The old man dialed a short number. An exhausted duty officer from the security service answered at the other end of the line. A few words spoken in a whisper. A description of the jacket. A description of the eating manner. 3 minutes later, an inconspicuous blue minibus pulled up to the canteen. 4 men in leather jackets stepped out. They did not run, they did not shout. They simply fanned out at the entrances. Jan noticed them when they were already inside. His hand with the fork froze halfway to his mouth. In that brief moment, he understood everything. He looked at the fork in his left hand, a thin, bent piece of metal that had become his death warrant. He saw his defeat reflected in that metal. All the years of training, the millions of rubles spent, the secret ciphers and safe houses, it all shattered against the habit of cutting a sausage with a knife. They took him professionally. A sharp blow to the back of the head so he wouldn't have time to bite the cyanide capsule hidden in a false tooth. His body went limp, and the fork fell to the floor with a dull metallic clang, staining his shoes with the remnants of potatoes. The waitress, wiping the next table, did not even scream. In Poland, in '82, people knew how not to look where history was happening. In the interrogation room, there were no lights glaring in the eyes, no screaming. There was only the steady hum of a reel-to-reel tape recorder, capturing confessions that Jan did not want to give. The officer conducting the interrogation was a young man with cold eyes who smoked endless, strong, unfiltered cigarettes. He did not ask about couriers. He did not ask about codes. He simply placed that same aluminum fork on the table in front of Jan. "Tell me, Jan, or whatever your name really is," the officer began, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "Why didn't you move the fork to your right hand? You were taught everything. You were taught to shoot from any position. You were taught to endure pain. You were taught to love a motherland you never saw. But they forgot to teach you how to be a simple, uneducated man who just wants to fill his stomach. They made an aristocrat of shadows out of you, but we needed an ordinary worker. Your left hand betrayed you in a way no traitor ever could." Jan remained silent. He stared at the fork. It now seemed to him the most complex technological object in the universe. He thought about how many others like him were making the same mistake right now in other cities around the world. Someone holding a door open too politely. Someone tying their shoelaces too perfectly. Someone shaving too cleanly for a man of his profession. The world of espionage is not a clash of ideologies. It is a clash of habits ingrained in early childhood. Operation codenamed Left Hand was closed a month after Jan's arrest. All his contacts were identified and liquidated. An entire network, built over years, collapsed like a house of cards because of one incorrect movement at a dinner table. In intelligence reports, this case became a classic example of cognitive dissonance between a legend and motor skills. A new rule was introduced for all illegals. In zones with a low level of domestic culture, eat only with a spoon or with your hands if possible. But for Jan, it no longer mattered. They took him to be shot early in the morning, when the fog over the Vistula was so thick it felt tangible. Gdansk was waking up to the sound of church bells and factory whistles. Jan sat in the back of the truck, looking at his hands. He tried to make his right hand tremble, as the hands of an ordinary, terrified man would. But his body remained flawlessly calm. To the very end, he remained an ideal machine created to perform tasks. A machine failed by one tiny, unaccounted-for detail in the programming code. When they led him to the brick wall of the old fort, he did not beg for mercy. He only asked for a cigarette.
Jan,
The officer handed him a pack.
take it.
Jan took the cigarette. And in that final moment, he failed again. He took it with 2 fingers so gracefully, so elegantly, that the officer only gave a sad smile. Some things cannot be fixed, even in the face of death. The Cold War was a time of great paradoxes. Spy satellites were launched into orbit, capable of reading a newspaper headline from hundreds of kilometers high. Nuclear submarines slid beneath the oceans, carrying the power of 1,000 suns. Thousands of analysts in Langley and Lubyanka decrypted gigabytes of intercepted
I
data.
found it.
But in
Let me
the
see
end,
that.
everything was decided by a bent aluminum fork in the hand of a man who simply forgot that he was supposed to be nobody. This is the true irony of operational psychology. We can hide our thoughts. We can hide our feelings. We can completely rewrite our biography and learn a foreign language so well that our own mother would not recognize our voice. But we cannot defeat our muscles. Our habits are our most honest betrayers. They live in our fingertips, in the way we step onto a stair, in the way we tilt our head when listening to the sound of rain. In a world where every step is under observation, any trifle becomes evidence. The left-hand case became a legend in narrow circles of professionals.
Pay
It is
close
studied
attention
by
to the
novices
ventilation
hoping
shaft.
to avoid similar mistakes. They train to eat like the poor, walk like losers, and dress like shadows. But the paranoia remains, because each of them knows, somewhere out there, in the gray crowd, there is always an old man with a sharp gaze, waiting for your hand to make one extra, too correct movement. And in that moment, the silence will become deafening, and your world will shrink to the size of a fork held in the wrong hand. The story of Jan Kazmarek ended quickly. The dry crack of shots startled birds over the fort walls, and then silence. His body was buried in an unmarked grave, its location erased from all registries. Life in Gdansk went on. People went to the same canteens, ate the same mashed potatoes, and grumbled about the government. No one noticed the disappearance of the gray man in the cheap jacket. Only the old officer sometimes came to the same spot, ordered a sausage, and stared at his hands for a long time, checking to see if they were doing anything that might attract the attention of God or the devil. This story is a reminder that in the great battles of empires, it is not those with more missiles who win, but those who are better at pretending to be an ordinary person. But pretending to be ordinary is the most difficult art in the world, because to be ordinary is to have no system, and a spy is always a system. And when a system clashes with the chaos of everyday life, chaos always finds a crack, even if that crack is the size of a tine on an aluminum fork. Did he know in that second that his life was already over? Most likely not. He thought he was safe because his documents were authentic and his legend was impenetrable. He forgot that in espionage, there are no trifles. There are only symptoms, and his symptom was incurable. He was too good for this dirty, imperfect world, and this world spat him out like a foreign body, unable to adapt to the simplicity of human existence. Now, when you pick up your cutlery, think about this. Think about how much information you give away about yourself with every gesture. How do you hold a cup of coffee? How do you adjust your tie? How do you open a door? We are always being watched, if not by people, then by reality itself, which does not tolerate a vacuum of authenticity. And in this great game, it is not the strongest or even the smartest who survive. The survivor is the one who knows how to blend into the grayness so deeply that even their own left hand forgets it was once part of something great. The finale of this story is not in the death of the agent, but in what remained after him. In the archives of the KGB, this case is marked with a red stripe. It is a warning to all who enter the battlefield without a uniform. Remember the fork. Remember that your culture is your cage, and if you want to leave it, you will have to kill everything in yourself that made you human, including the way you hold a knife. But is victory worth such a price? Every illegal answers that question for themselves when the hatch of the airlock closes behind them, leading into a foreign, cold reality.